My name is Elena Harper. I'm 34 years old, and until 3 months ago, I thought I had it all figured out. A successful career as a senior architect at Chen & Associates, one of Manhattan's most prestigious design firms. A beautiful brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. And Richard, my husband of 10 years, who always told me I was his everything. I should have known better. Success makes people nervous, especially when it's yours and not theirs. The day my life shattered started like any other Friday. I woke at 5:30 a.m., went for my usual run along the East River, and returned home to find Richard already dressed, nursing his second espresso. He looked good that morning, I remember thinking. His salt and pepper hair freshly cut, wearing the Tom Ford suit I'd bought him for his 40th birthday. "Big day?" he asked, not looking up from his phone. "The Torres presentation," I reminded him. "Remember? The mixed-use development in Tribeca. 18 months of work comes down to today." Right. He finally glanced up, offering that smile that used to make my knees weak. Now I realize it never quite reached his eyes. "You'll do great. You always do." I should have caught the bitterness underneath those words. Should have noticed how his jaw tightened when he said always. But I was too focused on my presentation, too consumed with making sure every detail was perfect. The Torres account was worth $8 million. Landing it would make me the youngest partner in Chen & Associates history. What I didn't know was that Richard had spent the last 6 months making sure that would never happen. I arrived at the office at 7:15 a.m., giving myself plenty of time to set up. Our conference room overlooked Madison Avenue, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city I'd conquered one blueprint at a time. My presentation boards were already arranged, each one showcasing the revolutionary design that would transform 3 blocks of abandoned warehouses into a sustainable mixed-use paradise. Living spaces, commercial areas, green roofs, community gardens. It was my masterpiece. Vanessa Sterling was already there, adjusting the projector. 26 years old, fresh from Columbia's architecture program, and hungry in that way that should have felt familiar because it was exactly how I'd been at her age. I'd taken her under my wing 6 months ago, mentoring her the way no one had mentored me. "Everything looks perfect, Elena," she said, her voice bright with what I thought was admiration. "You're going to nail this. Thanks to your help with the 3D renderings," I replied, meaning it. "That fly-through animation you created really brings the whole project to life." She smiled, and I missed the calculation behind it, the way a snake smiles at a mouse. By 9:45 a.m., the conference room was filling up. The Torres family, 3 generations of real estate developers with deep pockets and even deeper connections. City council representatives, members of the community board, and scattered among them, various stakeholders from our firm, including David Chen himself, our founding partner, and the man who'd given me my first real chance in this industry. Richard slipped in at 9:50, claiming a seat in the back row. I caught his eye and he gave me a thumbs up. My heart swelled with gratitude that he'd made time in his busy schedule as a strategic consultant to support me. I didn't know then that his entire schedule was fiction, that his consulting business existed only in carefully crafted LinkedIn posts and business cards printed at FedEx. That while I was working 60-hour weeks, he was spending his days at coffee shops, planning my destruction. The presentation started perfectly. I walked them through the vision, from the initial concept sketches to the detailed architectural plans. I explained how we'd preserve the industrial character while creating modern, sustainable spaces. How the community would benefit from new, affordable housing units. How the commercial spaces would prioritize local businesses. 30 minutes into my presentation, I was hitting my stride. The Torres patriarch was nodding appreciatively. The city council rep was taking notes. Even David Chen looked impressed, which was rare. That's when it happened. David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The sound cut through my sentence about load-bearing structures and green building materials. "Elena," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone of false regret that makes your stomach drop. "Could I interrupt for just a moment?" I forced a smile, trying to maintain my composure. "Of course, David." He walked to the front of the room, positioning himself beside me, and in that moment, I felt something shift. The energy in the room changed, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. "First, let me say that Elena has done excellent work on this project." He paused, and my internal alarm bells started ringing. That word excellent when you were expecting outstanding or exceptional. But before we proceed further, I need to address something that's come to my attention. My mouth went dry. In the back row, Richard leaned forward slightly, and I could swear I saw anticipation on his face. David pulled out his phone, swiping through something before turning to the large screen behind us. My beautiful architectural renderings disappeared, replaced by what looked like an email thread. These communications, David continued, his voice growing harder, suggest some concerning irregularities in the bid process. Questions about whether certain confidential information from competing firms might have been compromised. The room went completely silent. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I don't understand, I managed to say, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. What are you talking about? The accusations suggest. And here he looked directly at me, his expression a mask of professional disappointment, that you may have gained unauthorized access to competitor proposals, that you used inside information to undercut their bids and secure this contract unfairly. Blood drained from my face. That's absolutely false. I would never... Elena, David's voice cut through my protest. These allegations are serious. They come from credible sources within the industry. We have no choice but to investigate thoroughly. That's when Vanessa stood up, her movement drawing everyone's attention. She looked stricken, perfectly performing the role of reluctant whistleblower. I'm sorry, David, she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound authentic. But I have to speak up. I've noticed some irregularities in Elena's process. Files accessed at odd hours, conversations that seemed designed to extract information from colleagues at competing firms, pressure to cut corners on cost estimates. I stared at her, my brain struggling to process what I was hearing. This woman I'd mentored, who I'd stayed late helping with her portfolio, who I'd recommended for a raise just last month, was systematically destroying me in front of everyone who mattered. This is insane, I said, my voice rising despite my attempt to stay calm. Vanessa, you know none of that is true. You've been with me through this entire process. You know every decision was made ethically. I wanted to believe that, Vanessa interrupted, and I swear there were actual tears in her eyes. I really did. You've been such a mentor to me, but I can't ignore what I've seen. I have a responsibility to the firm, to our professional standards. David nodded solemnly. I appreciate your courage in coming forward, Vanessa. He turned back to me. Elena, in light of these allegations, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside while we investigate. Step aside? The words felt like they were being ripped from my chest. This is my project. 18 months of work, which makes these allegations all the more serious, David said. The Torres family deserves to know that any firm they partner with maintains the highest ethical standards. Until we complete our investigation, Vanessa will take over as lead architect on this project. The betrayal was so perfectly orchestrated, so completely devastating, that for a moment I couldn't even speak. Vanessa would get my project, my partnership, everything I'd worked for. And then, cutting through my shock, came Richard's voice from the back of the room. You did a good job, but... Every head in the room turned toward him. He was standing now, his expression a mixture of pity and something else, something that looked almost like satisfaction. But what? I heard myself ask, even though some part of me already knew I didn't want the answer. But I warned them about you, Richard said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. About your ambition, about how you'd do anything to succeed. I told Vanessa to watch carefully, to document everything. I knew eventually you'd cross a line. The room began to spin. My own husband. The man who'd held me while I cried about sexism in the industry. Who'd listened to me rant about glass ceilings in boys' clubs. Who'd celebrated every promotion, every successful project, every small victory. He'd been sabotaging me the whole time. Richard, I whispered, barely able to form his name. What are you talking about? David cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable for the first time. Your husband contacted me 3 months ago, Elena. He expressed concerns about your mental state, your professional ethics. He provided Vanessa's contact information, suggested she keep detailed records of the project development process. When these allegations surfaced, it all seemed to corroborate his warnings. 3 months. He'd been planning this for 3 months, and I'd had no idea. Every morning coffee, every shared dinner, every night lying next to him in bed, he'd been orchestrating my professional death. I think, David continued, his voice taking on that final, dismissive tone that signals the end of someone's career, that you should clear out your office. Security will escort you. We'll be in touch about the investigation. But given the severity of these allegations and your husband's testimony about your state of mind, I'm terminating your employment effective immediately. Terminated. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. I looked around the room, seeing the faces of colleagues I'd worked with for 8 years. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others wore expressions of judgment, already convinced of my guilt. The Torres family was gathering their things, clearly ready to distance themselves from this scandal. And in the back row, Richard was smiling, not broadly, just a small upturn of his lips that no one else would even notice. But I saw it. I saw the triumph in his eyes. That's when Vanessa walked over, placing a gentle hand on my arm in a gesture that might have looked supportive to anyone watching. "I'm so sorry it came to this, Elena," she said softly. "I really did learn so much from you. Your attention to detail, your innovative approaches, your client relationships. I'll make sure to put all those lessons to good use on the Torres project." She was thanking me for training my own replacement, for teaching her everything she needed to steal my career. I pulled my arm away from her touch, looking her directly in the eyes. "How long?" I asked quietly. "How long what? How long have you been sleeping with my husband?" Her expression flickered, just for a second, before settling back into innocent confusion. "Elena, I don't know what you're—" "Don't." My voice was harder than I'd ever heard it. "Don't insult my intelligence more than you already have. This wasn't just about the project. This was personal. So, how long?" Vanessa glanced at Richard, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. But she was young, arrogant, and couldn't resist the chance to twist the knife one more time. "Since the office holiday party," she said, her voice still soft, but her eyes cold. "He approached me, actually. Said his wife was too focused on her career to notice what she was losing at home, that he needed someone who understood the importance of supporting a man's ambitions instead of always competing with them. 6 months. They'd been having an affair for 6 months, right under my nose, while I was working myself to exhaustion on the project they were now stealing from me. "Security's here," David announced, sounding relieved to have this uncomfortable scene coming to an end. 2 uniformed guards approached, their faces professionally blank. I'd known these men for years. Marcus had just had a baby. Carlos was putting his daughter through college, and now they were here to escort me out like a criminal. "I can walk myself out," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Company policy," David replied, not meeting my eyes, given the nature of the allegations. So I walked, through the conference room where my career had just been executed, past the cubicles where junior architects pretended to be absorbed in their work, while definitely watching my humiliation parade, through the reception area where our receptionist Jessica mouthed, "I'm so sorry," as I passed. My office had already been sealed. A security guard posted outside. They'd moved fast. Clearly, this had all been planned, choreographed like a corporate assassination. "Your personal items will be packed and delivered," Marcus said quietly as we reached the elevator. "I'm sorry, Ms. Harper. For what it's worth, I never believed any of it." The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside, Marcus and Carlos flanking me like I might make a run for it. As the doors began to close, I caught one last glimpse of the office where I'd spent 8 years building a career. Vanessa was standing by the conference room, Richard beside her. His hand was on the small of her back, proprietary and intimate. She was laughing at something he'd said. They'd won. They'd taken everything. Or so they thought. What Richard and Vanessa didn't know, what David Chen had somehow failed to discover in all his investigating, was that the building we were standing in, the one housing Chen and Associates' prestigious offices, the one where I'd just been publicly destroyed and fired, wasn't owned by David Chen. It was owned by Harper Holdings, LLC. It was owned by me. My grandmother, the woman who'd raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12, hadn't just left me her love of architecture. She'd left me a real estate empire worth $43 million, buildings scattered across Manhattan, including this one, the Riverside Tower, purchased in 1987, now worth $12 million alone. Richard knew I'd inherited something when my grandmother died 5 years ago. I'd told him it was a modest trust fund, enough to supplement my income, but nothing life-changing. In reality, I'd been managing a portfolio of commercial properties while working full-time as an architect, because I genuinely loved the work, because I'd never wanted to be the kind of person who just lived off inheritance, because I'd wanted to prove myself on my own merit. And that integrity, that determination to succeed without using my family's wealth, had just been used to destroy me. The elevator reached the ground floor. I walked through the marble lobby, Marcus and Carlos trailing behind until I reached the street. Then they stopped, their job complete. "Good luck, Ms. Harper," Carlos said, and he actually meant it. I stood on Madison Avenue, surrounded by lunchtime crowds rushing past, everyone focused on their own lives, their own problems, completely unaware that my entire world had just imploded. My phone buzzed. A text from Richard. "Cleaning out the house today. Might want to stay with your mom tonight. We'll talk about division of assets once you've calmed down." Division of assets. He actually thought he was going to get half of everything. The brownstone I'd bought before we married. The investment accounts in my name only. Even, presumably, the trust fund he thought I had. Another text, this time from Vanessa. "No hard feelings, right? It's just business. You understand? Just business." They'd destroyed my reputation, stolen my project, ended my career, and it was just business. I stood there on that sunny Friday afternoon in May, watching yellow cabs stream past and vendors selling halal cart food on the corner, and felt something shift inside me. The shock was fading, burned away by something hotter, something more focused. They wanted to play games with my career? Fine. But they'd forgotten one crucial detail. The building they were celebrating in. The offices where Vanessa was probably already moving into my workspace. The conference room where David was probably smoothing things over with the Torres family. I owned all of it. And the lease. The one that Chen and Associates had signed 8 years ago when they moved into the Riverside Tower, came up for renewal in exactly 30 days. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had memorized but rarely used. "Harper Holdings Property Management." A professional voice answered. "This is Elena Harper," I said, my voice calm despite the rage boiling underneath. "I need you to pull the lease agreement for Chen and Associates. I want to know every clause, every stipulation, every possible mechanism for early termination." "Of course, Ms. Harper. May I ask if there's a problem?" "Not a problem," I replied, watching a woman in a power suit stride past, completely in control of her life. "Just a reassessment of our business relationships. I'd also like you to contact our attorney. I need to schedule a meeting for this afternoon. I'll arrange it immediately. One more thing," I added, my mind already racing through possibilities. "That commercial space we own on Worth Street, the one that's been vacant for 6 months. I want a full assessment of what it would take to convert it into high-end office space. Premium finishes, state-of-the-art technology. Comparable to the Riverside Tower, but better." There was a brief pause. "Are you thinking of starting a new venture, Ms. Harper?" "Something like that," I said. "How quickly could we have it ready? With the right contractors and budget? 3 months, possibly less. Make it happen. Money is no object. I want it perfect." After hanging up, I allowed myself one moment of satisfaction. Then I straightened my shoulders, smoothed down the Armani blazer I'd bought to celebrate my would-be partnership, and started walking. Not toward home, where Richard was probably packing his things into boxes he expected me to take elsewhere. Not toward my mother's house in Connecticut, where she would offer sympathy and wine and I told you so's about Richard never being good enough. Instead, I walked toward Fifth Avenue, toward the offices of Margaret Winters, the attorney who'd handled my grandmother's estate and who'd been waiting years for me to finally get serious about managing Harper Holdings as a full-time enterprise. My phone kept buzzing. Richard, probably wondering why I wasn't responding to his magnanimous offer to let me stay at my own mother's house. David Chen, likely crafting some corporate statement about the unfortunate incident. Even a few former colleagues, probably torn between sympathy and self-preservation. I ignored them all, because what they didn't understand yet, what they couldn't possibly comprehend, was that they hadn't destroyed me. They'd liberated me. For 10 years, I'd been trying to be someone's wife, someone's employee, someone who succeeded within the systems other people built. Now I was free to be what my grandmother had always intended, an empire builder. And Chen and Associates, the firm that had just publicly humiliated and fired me, was about to learn a very expensive lesson about checking ownership records before you destroy someone's life. But that reckoning would come later. First, I had work to do. Margaret Winter's office was in a brownstone on East 73rd Street, unassuming from the outside but housing one of the most ruthless corporate attorneys in New York. She'd been my grandmother's friend first, her attorney second, and she'd watched me grow up. The receptionist recognized me immediately. "Ms. Harper, we weren't expecting you today. Emergency meeting," I said. "Is Margaret available?" 5 minutes later, I was sitting in Margaret's corner office, looking out at the tree-lined street while she listened to my story with the focused intensity that had made her legendary in Manhattan legal circles. "So," she said when I finished, steeping her fingers in front of her face, "your husband orchestrated your firing with help from your protégée, who he's been sleeping with. They've destroyed your reputation and stolen your project, and now they're probably celebrating their victory. That about sums it up. And you want revenge." "I want justice," I corrected. "Revenge is emotional. What I'm planning is simply business. They should understand that." Margaret smiled, the kind of smile a shark might make if sharks could smile. "I've been waiting for this phone call for 5 years, ever since you insisted on continuing to work as an architect instead of properly managing your inheritance. Your grandmother would be proud. My grandmother would have seen through Richard from day one. True, she never liked him, thought he was weak." Margaret pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. "Let's start with the easy part. The brownstone is yours, purchased before marriage. He has no claim. Your investment accounts, also separate property. The Harper Holdings portfolio, definitely separate, and he has no knowledge of its full extent. He thinks I have a small trust fund, maybe $1 million or $2 million. And the actual value of Harper Holdings? $43 million in property assets, another $8 million liquid. The properties generate about $4 million in annual income." Margaret's smile widened. "So while he thinks he's married to a successful architect with a modest inheritance, he's actually been living with one of Manhattan's most significant commercial property owners. I wanted to succeed on my own merit," I said, hearing the defensiveness in my voice. "And you did. Your architectural work is exceptional. Everyone in the industry knows that, which is why this accusation of unethical behavior is so obviously fabricated. But Elena, your merit isn't diminished by also being smart enough to manage a fortune. Your grandmother built that portfolio specifically for you. It's time to stop hiding from it." She was right. I'd been so determined to prove I didn't need family money that I'd essentially pretended it didn't exist, and that pride had made me vulnerable. "The Chen & Associates lease," I said, redirecting the conversation. "What are our options?" Margaret pulled up a file on her computer. "The original lease is coming up for renewal in 30 days. There's a clause requiring 6 months' notice for non-renewal, but there's also an ethics clause." She looked up at me. "If the tenant engages in illegal or unethical business practices that damage the building's reputation, the lease can be terminated immediately with 30 days' notice." "What kind of practices?" "Fraud, discrimination, creating a hostile work environment, violations of professional standards." She paused meaningfully. "Falsely accusing and terminating an employee could potentially qualify, especially if we can prove it was done maliciously." "We can prove it," I said. "I keep copies of everything. Every project file, every email, every document. It's all backed up on my personal cloud. Then we have options. But Elena, I need to ask, what's your end goal here? Revenge for revenge's sake? Or are you actually interested in building something?" I thought about that question, about Richard's face when he'd said those words. "You did a good job," but about Vanessa's cold eyes while she thanked me for training her, about David Chen, who'd believed them without even asking for my side of the story. "I want to build something," I said finally. "I want to create the kind of firm I always wished Chen & Associates could be. Ethical, innovative, supportive of real talent regardless of gender or background. The kind of place where success comes from excellence, not sabotage. So you want to start your own architecture firm?" "Yes. And I want to fill it with every talented architect Chen & Associates has overlooked, underpaid, or pushed out. I want to steal their best clients by being better. I want them to watch everything they built crumble, while I create something superior." Margaret nodded approvingly. "Now that's a plan I can work with. Let's talk logistics. You have the Worth Street property, which could be converted into office space. You have the capital to establish the firm and cover operating costs for the first year. What you'll need is talent. I know at least 5 architects at Chen who've been passed over for promotion. Women mostly, but also a few men who didn't fit David's vision of the Chen & Associates type. If I can offer them better positions and actual respect, they'll jump ship. Do it quietly," Margaret advised. "Line up your team before you make any moves against Chen. You want to launch fully formed, not struggle to build while you're fighting a legal battle. What about Richard? The question came out harder than I intended. Ah, yes, the husband. Well, the good news is that in New York, we have equitable distribution, not community property. Given that your assets are separate and he contributed nothing to them, he's entitled to exactly nothing of Harper Holdings. The brownstone is yours. The investment accounts are yours. He walks away with whatever assets are in his own name, which is... Let me check. Margaret pulled up another file. According to the financial investigation I ran when you first retained me, 5 years ago, Richard Harper had approximately $47,000 in savings, a car worth maybe $20,000, and credit card debt of about $15,000. My stomach dropped. That can't be right. He told me his consulting business was doing well. Elena. Margaret's voice was gentle now. There is no consulting business. The LLC he registered exists on paper only. No clients, no income, no business activity beyond a website he paid someone to build, and a few staged photos on LinkedIn. The room tilted slightly. So all these years while I was working, he was living off your income. The brownstone you both lived in, which you purchased. The vacations you both took, which you paid for. The lifestyle you both enjoyed, which your architect salary funded while he played businessman. 10 years. 10 years of supporting a man who'd repaid me by orchestrating my professional destruction. I'm going to destroy him, I said quietly. Legally, Margaret added. We'll destroy him legally, and we'll do it in a way that ensures he never recovers. But Elena, we need to be smart about this. If we move too aggressively too fast, he might realize what he's actually been living with all these years. Better to let him think he's won while we build our case. How long will that take? To do it right? 3 months? Maybe 4? By then you'll have your new firm established, your team in place, and Chen and Associates will be in the middle of the biggest crisis they've ever faced. Then when Richard thinks he's sitting pretty with his young mistress, living off whatever settlement he thinks he's entitled to, we'll reveal what you actually own. I thought about it. 3 months of letting them think they'd won. 3 months of Richard and Vanessa celebrating while I plotted. 3 months of playing defeated while building an empire. Okay, I said. Let's do this right. What's step 1? Margaret pulled out a fresh legal pad. Step 1, we secure your assets. I'll draft documents transferring everything into an enhanced trust structure that will be completely protected. Step 2, we file for divorce citing irreconcilable differences. Nothing inflammatory. Nothing that suggests you're planning anything. You just want out of the marriage. He'll fight for half the brownstone. Let him try. We have documentation that you purchased it 3 years before marriage with money from your parents' life insurance settlement. He signed papers acknowledging it was your separate property. The best lawyer in New York couldn't get him a claim on that house. What about the firm? Step 3, you start recruiting. Quietly. Coffee meetings, lunches, casual conversations. You feel out the architects you want on your team. You don't make offers yet, just plant seeds. Let them know you're thinking about your next move and you'd like their input. And Chen and Associates? Step 4. 30 days from now, we deliver notice of lease non-renewal. By then, you'll have documentation of their unethical conduct, including your wrongful termination. They'll have to vacate the Riverside Tower within 90 days, and in this market, finding comparable office space on short notice will be nearly impossible. They could sue me. They could try. But you're the property owner, and you have an ethics clause in the lease they violated. More importantly, once they sue, it becomes public record. Every detail of what they did to you, including Richard's involvement. The story will make every architecture and business publication in the city. Chen's reputation will be demolished. I let that sink in. David Chen, who'd built his firm on the reputation of integrity and excellence, would be exposed as someone who fired a senior architect based on false accusations from her husband's mistress. The Torres family would walk away. Other clients would follow. The firm he'd spent 30 years building would collapse. Won't that hurt the people who still work there? The ones who had nothing to do with this? Which is why step 3 is so important. You recruit the good ones first. You give them a life raft before the ship sinks. The ones who stay behind made their choice. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. Richard called. Said you had a breakdown at work. I told him that was nonsense and hung up. What's really going on? I need to call my mother, I said to Margaret. Of course. But Elena, before you go, I need you to understand something. What you're planning to do will change your life completely. You won't be able to go back to being just an architect after this. You'll be visible. You'll be a target. People will know you're wealthy, and they'll treat you differently. People already treated me differently today, I pointed out. They just didn't know I had the resources to fight back. Fair point. Okay, go call your mother. But Elena, welcome to the game. Your grandmother always knew you belonged here. It's about time you figured it out too. I left Margaret's office with a folder full of documents to sign and a timeline for the next 4 months that would reshape my entire life. The afternoon sun was still bright. The city still bustling with people who had no idea their world was any different than it had been that morning. But mine had changed completely. I wasn't Elena Harper, disgraced architect anymore. I was Elena Harper, property owner, investor, and about to be founder of what would become Manhattan's most successful architecture firm. But first, I had to let Richard think he'd won. The brownstone was quiet when I arrived home at 6 p.m. Richard's car was gone from the street, but I could see lights on in the living room. He was probably packing, or maybe just celebrating with Vanessa in the house he thought we'd be dividing. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Richard was in the kitchen, pouring himself a scotch from the bottle I'd bought him for Christmas. 50-year-old Macallan, almost $4,000. He was drinking my expensive scotch while planning to leave me. "Elena," he said when I walked in, his voice carefully neutral. "I wasn't sure you'd come home tonight. It's my house. Our house," he corrected. "For now, anyway. We need to talk about how we're going to handle this transition." Transition. Such a clinical word for the end of a marriage built on lies. "Okay," I said, setting my bag on the counter. "Let's talk." He seemed surprised by my calm demeanor. He'd probably expected tears, accusations, hysteria. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat down at the kitchen table, the one we'd picked out together at a Brooklyn flea market 7 years ago. "I think it's best if we handle this amicably," Richard began, settling into the speech he'd probably rehearsed. "We both made mistakes in this marriage. You were focused on your career. I felt neglected. It happens." "Is that what happened?" I asked mildly. "You felt neglected? Elena, you were working 70-hour weeks. You never had time for us anymore. I'm not trying to blame you, but you have to acknowledge your part in how we got here." The audacity of it almost made me laugh. He'd orchestrated my firing, stolen my career, ruined my reputation, and now he was lecturing me about work-life balance. "You're right," I said, watching his expression shift to surprise. I was focused on my career. I should have paid more attention to what was happening at home. Exactly. And I think if we approach the divorce from that perspective, from a place of mutual understanding, we can both walk away with what we need. "What do you need, Richard?" He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Well, obviously the house will need to be sold. I was thinking a 60-40 split, given that you had higher earnings during the marriage. I don't want to be unfair." 60-40. He wanted 40% of a $4 million brownstone he'd contributed nothing toward purchasing or maintaining. "That seems reasonable," I lied. "Really?" He looked genuinely surprised. "I thought you'd fight me on this. What's the point? You're right. We both contributed to the marriage in different ways. If you need 40% of the house to start your new life, then that's what you should get." I could see him relaxing, probably already mentally spending his expected windfall. $1.6 million would go a long way toward setting up his new life with Vanessa. "I appreciate your maturity about this," he said. "I know today was hard for you, but honestly, Elena, maybe this is for the best. That job was consuming you. Now you have a chance to step back, figure out what you really want." "You're probably right," I agreed, taking a sip of wine to hide my expression. Maybe I was too focused on Chen and Associates. Maybe it's time to try something different. "Exactly. And you're talented enough that you'll land somewhere else. Maybe a smaller firm, less pressure. You could actually have a life again. A smaller firm, less pressure." He was already trying to shrink my ambitions, to make me believe that losing Chen and Associates meant losing everything. "What about you?" I asked. "What will you do?" "Well, Vanessa and I have been talking." He had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable admitting this. "With her taking over the Torres project, there will be opportunities. She's going to need support, someone to handle the business side while she focuses on design. I have experience with that kind of strategic consulting. Strategic consulting. The business that didn't exist. He was going to ride Vanessa's coattails the same way he'd ridden mine, except she was too young and ambitious to realize it yet. That sounds perfect for you, I said. I think so. And Elena, I hope we can stay friends. I never wanted to hurt you, but sometimes people just grow apart. Friends. He wanted to be friends after destroying my career and cheating on me with my mentee. Of course, I said, my voice warm despite the rage burning in my chest. Why wouldn't we stay friends? He visibly relaxed, probably thinking this was going even better than he'd hoped. The difficult wife who'd been too focused on her career was being reasonable about the divorce. He was going to walk away with money, a new girlfriend, and a clear conscience. I'm going to stay at a hotel tonight, I said, standing up. Give you space to pack your things. We can work out the details through lawyers, keep everything civil and professional. That's very mature of you. Like you said, what's the point of making this harder than it needs to be? I gathered a few things from the bedroom, while Richard watched from the doorway, probably making sure I wasn't taking anything he considered marital property. Let him watch. Let him think he knew what I was taking. He had no idea what was coming. As I left the brownstone, carrying an overnight bag I'd deliberately kept small, Richard called out from the doorway. Elena, for what it's worth, I really did love you. I just wish you'd been able to love me the same way. I turned back to look at him, standing in the doorway of my house, wearing the watch I'd bought him, drinking the scotch I'd purchased, living off the success I'd built. I did love you the same way, Richard, I said quietly. That's what makes this so devastating. Then I walked away, and I didn't look back. 3 months passed in a blur of strategic planning and careful execution. True to Margaret's advice, I let Richard think he was winning. We filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. His lawyer came back with demands for half the brownstone's value, spousal support for 3 years, and half of what he believed was a $2 million trust fund. My lawyer, carefully coached by Margaret, pushed back but not too hard. We settled on what Richard thought was a victory. He'd get 35% of the brownstone when it sold, 2 years of spousal support, and a $50,000 lump sum from the trust fund. He thought he was walking away with over $2 million. The paperwork was structured carefully, drafted by Margaret with the precision of a surgeon. The settlement specified that Richard was entitled to 35% of the proceeds from the property located at 127 Garden Place, Brooklyn, New York, purchased by Elena Harper prior to marriage and acknowledged as her separate property. Not 35% of my assets. Not 35% of anything else I owned. Just that one specific property. Richard's lawyer should have caught that. Should have insisted on broader language. On discovery of all assets. On verification of the trust fund's actual value. But they were dealing with what they thought was a simple divorce between a disgraced architect and her betrayed husband. They never looked deeper. While the divorce papers crawled through the system, I was busy building an empire. My first recruit was Sarah Chen, David's own daughter. She'd been working at her father's firm for 6 years, consistently passed over for promotion while less talented men advanced. We met for coffee at a place in Soho, far from Chen & Associates' usual territory. You've heard what they're saying about me, I said after we'd ordered. I've heard what my father says, Sarah replied carefully. I've also seen your work for the past 8 years. Those accusations were garbage, and anyone with half a brain knows it. Then why didn't you speak up? Because I'm the boss's daughter. Anything I said would have been dismissed as nepotism or naivety. But Elena, I kept copies of everything. Every project you worked on, every client interaction, every performance review. If you ever decide to fight back, I can help. What if I told you I wasn't interested in fighting back? What if I said I was interested in building something better? Sarah's eyes sharpened with interest. I'd ask what you had in mind. A new firm, smaller, more agile, focused on sustainable design and ethical practices. The kind of place where talent gets rewarded regardless of gender or political alliances. The kind of firm Chen & Associates used to be before your father got comfortable. When can I start? Over the next month, I had similar conversations with 4 more architects, all of them talented, all of them frustrated with Chen & Associates' culture. Marcus Johnson, who'd been denied partnership 3 times despite bringing in millions in business. Patricia Rodriguez, whose innovative designs were consistently attributed to male colleagues. David Kim and Jennifer Walsh, both brilliant designers who'd watched mediocre people advance while they stagnated. By mid-July, I had my core team. We met in secret, in coffee shops and parks, carefully planning our new venture. I secured the Worth Street property, and contractors began the transformation into premium office space. My architect friends, thinking they were just consulting on the design, created something spectacular without realizing they were building their own future home. At Chen & Associates, the cracks were beginning to show. The Torres project, now under Vanessa's leadership with Richard as her strategic consultant, was behind schedule and over budget. Vanessa, it turned out, was excellent at copying other people's ideas, but struggled to handle the complex logistics of a major development project. Richard's consulting consisted mostly of expensive lunches and vague advice about synergy and brand positioning. In August, I had lunch with Margaret to review our progress. The Worth Street office will be ready by September 15th, I reported. I have 5 confirmed architects ready to join, pending official offers. I've secured initial operating capital of $3 million, which should cover our first year with room for growth. And the name? Harper Architecture plus Design. Simple, clean, and it clearly identifies this as my firm. Your grandmother would approve. What about Chen & Associates? The lease expires September 1st. Have you sent the non-renewal notice? Delivered yesterday morning. David called me personally within an hour, furious. He's threatening to sue. Let him. We have documentation of the wrongful termination, Richard's involvement, Vanessa's false accusations. If he sues, all of that becomes public record. He's realizing that now. His lawyer called this afternoon suggesting arbitration. They want to settle quietly. No settlement. They wanted to play hardball with my career. Now they can deal with the consequences. Margaret smiled approvingly. You've learned well. There's just one problem. What? Chen & Associates can't find replacement office space. The market's tight right now, and no landlord wants to touch them after word got out about the ethics violation clause. David's been calling around trying to find out who tipped off other building owners, but nobody's talking. Did you tip them off? I may have had my assistant mention the situation to a few colleagues in the property management industry. Word spreads fast when there's potential liability involved. So what happens to Chen & Associates? They're scrambling. They've got until September 30th to vacate the Riverside Tower, and they have no place to go. They're talking about subleasing space in Newark, which would be professional suicide for a Manhattan firm. Their clients are already nervous. Good. Elena, I need to make sure you understand what's happening here. Chen & Associates is going to collapse. David spent 30 years building that firm, and it's going to be destroyed in a matter of months. Are you prepared for the fallout? I thought about Richard's face when he'd said those words, about Vanessa's cold eyes, about David Chen, who'd ended my career without even asking for my side of the story. Yes, I said simply. I'm prepared. Then we moved to phase 2. It's time to make your new firm public. The press release went out on August 15th. Harper Architecture plus Design. Launches with focus on sustainable, ethical design. The announcement detailed my background, carefully omitting the controversy at Chen & Associates, but emphasizing my project portfolio and innovative approach. It listed my core team, all of them prominent architects leaving Chen & Associates simultaneously. The industry reaction was immediate and explosive. Architecture blogs picked up the story within hours. Mass exodus from Chen & Associates. What does it mean? Business journals started investigating. Is the Chen empire crumbling? Women's professional organizations celebrated. Harper Architecture, a new model for gender equity in design. And then someone, probably Sarah Chen, leaked the real story to the press. The wrongful termination, the fabricated ethics violations, the husband's involvement with the young architect who'd stolen my project. Within 48 hours, it was everywhere. The New York Times ran a feature, How One Architect Turned Career Sabotage into a Business Empire. Forbes followed with, Elena Harper, the fall and rise of Manhattan's newest architecture power player. Even People magazine got involved. Designer Revenge, How She Turned Her Husband's Betrayal into a multi-million-dollar success story. The coverage was brutal for Chen & Associates. Every article mentioned David's hasty termination of a senior architect based on dubious accusations. Every piece highlighted Richard's role in orchestrating my downfall. Every story questioned how a firm known for integrity had fallen so far. The Torres family pulled their contract from Chen & Associates. issuing a statement about concerns regarding ethical standards and project management. 3 more major clients followed. Within a week, Chen & Associates had lost 40% of its business. By the end of August, they'd lost 60%. David tried damage control, issuing statements about misunderstandings and errors in judgment, but it was too late. The narrative had been set, and the court of public opinion had rendered its verdict. On September 1st, when the lease officially expired, Chen & Associates had nowhere to go. They ended up taking space in a characterless building in Queens, a humiliating come-down for a firm that had once occupied premium Manhattan real estate. On September 15th, Harper Architecture Plus Design officially opened its doors in the Worth Street building. The office was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows, exposed brick, state-of-the-art technology, and an open layout that encouraged collaboration. It was everything Chen & Associates space had been, but better. My core team of 5 architects had grown to 12, with more inquiring weekly. Former Chen & Associates clients were calling, asking for proposals. The Torres family reached out personally, requesting that we take over their project. Vanessa made a mess of it, Mr. Torres told me over lunch. 6 months of work, and we're further from completion than when she started. We'd like to offer you the contract if you're interested. I'm interested, I said, but I'd need to start over. Vanessa's plans won't work. That's what our engineers said. How long would it take? 3 months to complete new designs. Construction could begin by January. Done. The contract's yours. $8 million. The project that had been stolen from me was now mine again. And this time, it would be done right. But the satisfaction of professional success paled compared to what happened next. Richard showed up at my new office on a Tuesday afternoon, looking nothing like the confident man who'd orchestrated my firing 4 months earlier. He'd lost weight. His expensive clothes hung loose on his frame. The Tom Ford suit had been replaced with something off the rack. "Elena," he said when my assistant showed him into my office, "I need to talk to you." "I don't think we have anything to discuss, Richard. Our divorce will be final next week." "It's about the settlement." "What about it?" "Your lawyer negotiated the terms. I agreed to them. It's done. The brownstone sold last week," he said, his voice strained. "I got my 35%, $1.4 million. But the trust fund, your lawyer is saying it was only $50,000 total. That can't be right. You have more than that." I looked at him calmly, my expression carefully neutral. "Why would you think that?" Because you always had money. The house, the car, the vacations. That didn't all come from your architect's salary. Actually, it did. I was making $350,000 a year as a senior architect, more than enough to cover our lifestyle, especially since you weren't contributing anything. He flinched. "That's not fair. I was building my consulting business." "Richard, there is no consulting business. There never was. You've been unemployed for 10 years living off my income while pretending to work. That's not... I had clients. Name one." The silence stretched between us. "The point is," he finally said, "you must have more money. Some kind of inheritance or investment. I deserve half of it. You received exactly what was specified in the divorce agreement. 35% of the Brooklyn property and $50,000 from my trust fund. That was the settlement you negotiated. But you're launching a new firm. This office. Where did the money come from?" "Private investors," I lied smoothly. "People who believe in my vision and wanted to support a woman-owned business." "I don't believe you." "I don't care what you believe, Richard. We're divorced. You got your settlement. What I do now is none of your business." He stood up, his face reddening. "You played me. You hid assets during the divorce. That's illegal. I'll sue you for fraud." "Go ahead," I said calmly. "But you should know that my lawyer documented everything very carefully. Every asset you're entitled to was listed in the settlement. You signed papers acknowledging that you were receiving your full and fair share. If you sue me now, claiming there were hidden assets, you'll have to prove you knew about them during the divorce and concealed that knowledge from your own lawyer. That's fraud on your part. You can't do this. I already did. And Richard, you should leave now. Security is very efficient about removing unwanted visitors." He stared at me for a long moment, seeing perhaps for the first time the woman he'd underestimated so completely. "I loved you," he said finally. "No," I corrected gently. "You loved what I could give you. My success, my income, my stability. You just never realized how much more there was. After he left, I sat in my office, my beautiful office with its view of Lower Manhattan, and allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Not because I'd hurt Richard, though he certainly deserved it, but because I'd proven something important. They'd tried to destroy me, and instead, I'd built an empire. 6 months later, Harper Architecture Plus Design was thriving. We'd completed the Torres project to overwhelming acclaim. 3 more major developments were in progress. My team had grown to 25 architects, and we were turning away more work than we could accept. Chen and Associates officially dissolved in March. David Chen retired quietly, his reputation never fully recovering. The firm's remaining architects scattered to other companies, their careers tainted by association with the scandal. Vanessa Sterling left Manhattan entirely, taking a position at a small firm in Portland. Rumor had it she was dating her new boss, a pattern apparently too ingrained to break. As for Richard, he moved back in with his mother in New Jersey. The one. $4 million from the house sale evaporated quickly. Bad investments, expensive lawyers for the fraud case he'd tried and failed to bring against me, and the cost of maintaining the lifestyle he'd grown accustomed to while married to me. Last I heard, he was working as a manager at a big box store, finally earning his own paycheck for the first time in over a decade. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall. By the time he'd spiraled that far, he'd become irrelevant to my life. A cautionary tale, nothing more. But I did feel satisfaction in what I'd built. Harper Architecture. Plus, design wasn't just successful, it was changing the industry. We'd implemented progressive policies on work-life balance, created mentorship programs for women and minorities, and maintained strict ethical standards that made us the gold standard in Manhattan architecture. My grandmother's fortune, once hidden out of pride, now funded scholarships for architecture students who couldn't afford expensive programs. The Harper Foundation supported sustainable design initiatives and community development projects. I'd taken everything they tried to steal from me and turned it into something greater than they could have imagined. On the anniversary of that Friday in May when my life had imploded, I stood in my office, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. The city glittered in the evening light, full of buildings I'd had a hand in designing, spaces I'd helped create, lives I'd impacted through architecture. My phone rang. Sarah Chen, calling from a site visit. Elena, the clients love the new designs. They're ready to sign the contract. Excellent. Let's schedule the celebration dinner for the team. They earned it. Already done. Elena? Yes? Thank you. For taking a chance on us. For showing us that there was a better way. After hanging up, I thought about that Friday in May. About Richard's smile when he'd said, "You did a good job," but about walking out of Chen & Associates with security guards flanking me. About standing on Madison Avenue, watching my career die in real time. If you'd told me then that a year later I'd be running the most successful architecture firm in Manhattan, I wouldn't have believed you. But then again, they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed that destroying my career meant destroying me. They forgot that I was my grandmother's heir, trained from childhood to build empires out of ashes. They forgot that you can take away someone's job, but you can't take away their talent, their intelligence, or their resources. Most importantly, they forgot to check the property records before celebrating their victory in a building I owned. That was their first mistake. Their last mistake was underestimating me. And unlike them, I didn't make mistakes. I built dynasties.